This is the video animated version of the Radwa and Radwa podcast, where we aim to communicate scientific research to science enthusiasts. We post 4 versions of each episode, in English and Arabic, and in podcast and YouTube video formats. All the links are in the description below. You will also find our references in the description. We are your hosts, Radwa Ewaisha,
and Radwa Sharaf.
PhDs, pharmacists, and molecular biologists. In our episode today, we will be discussing genetically modified food. What is genetically modified food?
Thanks so much for the question, Radwa. A genetically modified food is a food that originated from a plant where we changed and altered the genes present in that plant. So let's see what options do we have. There are 3 potential scenarios. The first scenario is the gene right now exists in the plant, and we changed some of the bases in that DNA or in that gene to change the characteristics of the plant so that it's more convenient or it's more tolerant to certain diseases and so forth. The second option is that we inserted a gene into this plant that was not existent. So we got a gene from a different plant and moved it to our plant of choice right now. And then the final third scenario is the gene exists in the plant, but we deleted it through the process of recombinant engineering. A long time ago, before we had the technology to generate genetically modified food, farmers used a process called selective breeding, where they specifically bred plants that had the characteristics they were looking for. But right now, with the current technology we have, we can alter and change the genes of the plant to confer new characteristics onto this plant, and thus generate genetically modified foods. And this is something that is very much widespread. We know that more than 95% of animals that are used for meat and dairy in the US eat genetically modified crops. And a large proportion of the crops that we consume as human beings are also genetically modified.
That's very interesting. So, why genetically modify food? Many people think it's much better to leave it the way it exists in nature. Isn't that true?
That's a really good question. I think there are a few scenarios why we might want to modify the genes present in the plants we consume. Let's tackle some of these scenarios. The first option is maybe we want to improve the yield. We know that some plants are susceptible to certain diseases or insect pests that could potentially wipe out all the crops that we have. So that would be a big problem for mankind in general, not just for the farmer who planted these crops. And so we can use genetically modified plants to allow them to be resistant to these diseases. So for example, there's a species of potato plant. It was the very first pesticide producing crop to be approved in the United States. So in this scenario, the plant is producing the pesticide. We don't need to spray it with any external pesticides in order to allow it to become resistant to these pests. Another option is we might want to increase the tolerance of the plants to the herbicides that we're spraying so that the chemicals can eliminate some of the herbs or pests that we don't want, but at the same time the plant continues to survive and the crops are maintained. Another scenario is we want to increase the nutrient value of the plants and the crops we have. So a very prominent example of this is the golden rice. This is a variety of rice that's produced through genetic engineering, and it's produced to biosynthesize beta-carotene, which is a precursor to vitamin A. So instead of just eating plain old rice, we're eating a variant of rice that has an increased nutrient value that allows us, the consumers, to use these nutrients and build our bodies up. And then the final option is convenience. So a lot of us may like to consume certain types of foods but are inconvenienced by the presence of seeds. Think of watermelons. Some people like them, but they don't like to get rid of the seeds while they're eating them. Or grapes. Also, there are seedless variants and variants with seeds. And so for our own convenience, we can genetically engineer the plant to produce or not produce the seed.
That's very interesting. Is it dangerous? Many people think that genetically modified food is not good for their health. Is it really dangerous to consume genetically modified food?
That's a question I think we all hear often. One thing we just have to all be clear on is that genetically modified food and plants cannot and will not change our own body's DNA or our own body's genes. Because a lot of these foods that we consume by eating. So they go through our gastrointestinal system, they pass through our stomachs and our intestines, where the acids and the enzymes present in that system will degrade and break down that DNA and those genes. And so those genes, they could not insert themselves into our own genes or alter our own genes' function or genetic composition in any way, shape, or form. But something that we have to be mindful of is the potential for allergic reactions. For example, if some people are allergic to nuts, and we genetically engineer a different plant, a potato plant, to include genes from a nut producing plant, then it's possible that this new plant, the potato plant that has the nut genes, this plant potentially could induce an allergic reaction in someone who is allergic to the original nut plant. So that's something we have to be mindful of. But can it change our own genome? That's a definite no. Can it alter our own metabolism? Again, a definite no. And so far, we've consumed genetically modified plants for a very long time, and there is no scientific evidence that shows that these plants have a negative impact on our own human genome, our own human DNA.
Thanks so much for the clarification.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Feel free to reach out with suggestions for future episodes or leave us a comment directly on our YouTube video. See you next time!